All right, guys, so we're going to talk about extrema. So extrema refers to the maximum or minimum values of a function. And you basically have two different types. You have a relative max or min, or an absolute max or min. So for an absolute max or min, it is the greatest or least value of a function over its entire domain. So not just within a specific interval, but over the entire domain. That would be considered an absolute max or an absolute min. A relative max or min is the greatest or least value over some interval in the domain. So basically you have a restricted domain, not over the entire thing. So let's take a look. It's easier to take a look at a function to talk about this. So if we want to find the minimum or maximum or maximum of this function, we have this quadratic here. I went ahead and put the point what this lowest point is, which I kind of gave it away for you. So this is definitely going to be a minimum. Now, it is a relative min, but because it's also the lowest part, it is both a relative and an absolute min. So this point right here is a relative min at 0.3, which is also the absolute minimum, which is at 0.3. Again, because this point here is the lowest point of the function, which makes it an absolute min. And because within any interval, this has a dip, it goes from going down from decreasing back to increasing, so it has a minimum value as a relative min. So you can have all absolute mins are relative mins, but not all relative mins are absolute mins, if that makes sense. So again, this low point here, while it's a relative min, it's also the lowest point, so it is an absolute min. Talking about a maximum value, we know that, excuse me, as a quadratic, this goes up forever. This never stops increasing. Therefore, there is no max. There is no max at all. There's definitely no absolute max within this interval from negative infinity all the way to infinity. Now, if you were to restrict your domain somehow, so if you were just looking from, let's say, like from here to here on your domain values, if you were just restricting it to those, then yes, you would have a max, which would be a relative max, which would be right here, and this would be a relative min because you restricted the domain. We're not restricting it here. We're talking about the max and mins over the entire function. So therefore, this is the 0.3 is the only minimum we have, and it's an absolute, a relative, and a absolute min. Let's look at another one. So here we have this function right here. So I went ahead and pointed and highlighted the different parts where it's changing from increasing to decreasing and so on, because that's where you're going to have your relative mins and maxes. So if we look at these two right here, these 2 points, you can see they have the same y value. So they're basically at the same level in terms of dipping down low, they go to y equals 3. So they are at the same exact level on the y-axis. So in terms of being a min, they have the same weight basically because they're on the same y value. So they are both relative mins. So that happens at -1, 3, and 1, 3. But because they are also the lowest point of a function throughout the entire domain, these are also absolute minimums. So -1, 3, and 1, 3. Let's talk about maximum. Well, we just said before, this goes up forever, so it doesn't have an absolute max at all. But we do have a relative max right here, because this function is going up and then it's going down, so it changes direction. So we have a relative max at that point, which is 0, 4. All right, let's look at one more. So here we go. We have another function. Go ahead and highlight these points. And I'm going to basically round, because I'm not going to list all these decimal values. I'll just round them. So we have, this is a little bit different from before, we actually have 2 relative maxes, and only one of them is an absolute max. Going back to this here, look, these 2 were both relative mins, but because they were on the same y value, they were both absolute mins. Well, going here, you can see that this is a relative max, this is a relative max, but this point is the highest point of the function. So we have a relative max at, so I'm going to say negative 0.7, just round that to 1.8. And then this point, which is 1.4 to 6.7. So those are both relative maxes. We only have an absolute max at the 1.4, 6.7. which is this point here. And then in terms of min, we have a relative min here, but because this function goes down forever, we don't have an absolute min, we only have a relative min at, and that is actually 2 integer values, so at 0, 1. All right, so hopefully this explains Extrema a little bit, and then we're going to go ahead and move into the next video. We're going to move into increasing and decreasing intervals and end behavior.